The views and opinions expressed during Love and Life with Lana and Dave are those only of the speakers and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or the position of our podcast hosts or affiliates. Any content provided is not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, anyone, or anything. All right, let's do it.
You're listening to Love and Life with Lana and Dave, the podcast where logic is power and you take control. Thank you for tuning in and making the choice to listen in and get ideas for your own love and life. Now, here are your hosts, Lana Williams and David Vaccaro.
Hey, last week you heard part 1 of Fighting Manipulation with Logic. We're getting right back into it this week. So the next thing I wanted to bring up was negging. And this is part 2, and we're still in the middle of examples of manipulation. And negging it's backhanded compliments, it's comparison, it's criticism, it's one-upping, it's insults, and things like that in conversation that kind of knock you down. Those are also built to erode self-esteem and to make you feel lesser than the other person. And so if you say, hey, I've done this, and they say, well, you may have done this, but I did this. Or a backhanded compliment of, wow, you're really brave wearing something like that. I could never do it. Something like that where you're supposed to be getting a compliment from somebody, or they're supposed to be trying to give you one, but it ends up turning into something that is sort of like an insult. There's a lot of that in dating. There's a lot of that in friendships with certain people. They are very, very manipulative, and this is how they react and interact with people. It's kind of stanky. You don't really want to deal with this. Again, this is one of those things where if it happens enough times, it's just doesn't make sense to continue to. If this is how somebody sees you, if somebody feels like they need to one-up you or they need to make you feel bad in order to interact with you, and yes, it comes from insecurity, it doesn't seem like it makes sense, viable. It's not a viable thing to kind of hang around somebody that's doing that. It doesn't make much sense to me that you would want to. So I would phase somebody like that out eventually, because it's probably more trouble than it's worth to keep a relationship going. Yeah, and that rolls us into insults. People that just straight up insult you all the time. Some people are not covert at it. Some people are. And to me, negging is a little more of a covert thing where they try to wrap it in a compliment. But it really, when you look at the bottom line of it, there's an insult in there. And insults are, obviously not covert at all. They're very direct. And if somebody insults you all the time, and that's a manipulation. It's a manipulative tactic, usually to make the person that's insulting you feel better. I think it's probably a really elementary, basic, ridiculous way to do it, but some people do that. And I'm from New England, and everybody's roasting everybody up here, so I get that. Kind of calling each other names as a bonding tool. At least your kids growing up in this area. We did do that, but if it's to the point where you start feeling like shit all the time because somebody keeps telling you that you're a terrible person or you don't look right or whatever it is that they're saying, again, I don't see why keeping a relationship like that up is beneficial to you. I don't know about them, but as far as you're concerned, if it makes you feel worse than you already do, it doesn't make sense to continue. So I would definitely phase that out or scrap that. The next one is the prove it theory. I call it the prove it theory. It's like me saying, well, all men are jerks, and I'm waiting for somebody to say, well, I'm not a jerk. If you're not a jerk, prove me wrong. I'm sorry, but I've never met a decent guy. Maybe somebody but out there can prove me wrong. It's a form of manipulation to try to get people to they're looking for somebody that's being oppositional in order to get what I want. That if I was doing that would be why I'd be trying to manipulate people into proving to me that that's not true. Again, I think it's a really basic tactic, but a lot of people do employ this. Oh, women, you're all this anyway, or you're all that anyway, or you whatever. Trying to get people to say, I'm not like that. I'm not like that. I don't think I wouldn't personally get involved in an interaction like that. If you think all people are terrible and you're waiting for somebody to prove you wrong, that's a job, no matter what it is. If it's a friendship, or if you work for somebody, you have a boss that says all employees are eventually turn out to be blah, blah, blah. It's probably, even if it's consciously done. It's a way to get you to put a bunch of effort in to like try to impress them into thinking that you're the one in play that's not like that. And that's no good comes from that. That's just that's like a lot of work for you to like try to become good in their eyes. And that's really what they're trying to get people to do. And I personally don't think that's a healthy environment. So that's the prove it theory. Absolutes. And I'll use this because I always use this. I'll use the bar theory, and I've been a DJ for years. So I've been in and out of bars and clubs and venues and anything like that. And I have had people say to me, oh, well, everybody in bars is no good. Like all people in bars are derelicts or whatever the case may be. Like they just think every single person in a bar is a terrible person. I happen to have firsthand knowledge that that's not true. A lot of people in bars work there and have usually full-time jobs, and this is something we're doing on the side of that. So a lot of people in bars are they're alcoholics, but that's not what I was going to say. A lot of people in bars are workaholics, and what they're doing in this bar tonight is, on the side, it's a 30 hours on top of some kind of 60-hour job. They're working somewhere else. So a lot of people, at least that work in bars, are workaholics. They work a lot of hours. They're trying to put money away for something. They have some form of ambition, and this is their way to get extra cash, even if it's, hey, I want to buy a car, hey, I want to have spending money, whatever it is. Very few people, I'm not saying none of them, but very few people have nothing else going on and work in a bar and that's it. A lot of people usually work in bars as a side job, unless they're bartenders like all day long, and those bartenders that are in a place all day long make a lot of money, or they make a decent amount of money, or they at least, as far as bartenders go, if you're working in a lounge or because if you're working all day in a bar, it's generally a restaurant, and it's usually some kind of upscale place, where you're slinging drinks somewhere where they're serving dinners and lunches and things like that. And the tips tend to be better on day shifts like that. So it's still nothing to sneeze at. But my point is, if somebody says everybody in a bar is a jerk or everybody that's in a bar is no good, what that really is, follow me on this, is that they don't want to do the work to screen people in a bar. They don't want to go to a bar. I've been in these conversations where somebody says, well, have you ever met anybody? And if you've ever let's go to such and such a place. Maybe you'll meet somebody. And the other person says, well, you never want to meet anybody in a bar because none of those people are any good, right? So what that tells them is that they can dismiss like the bar and the club and these kind of places entirely. If they dismiss the place entirely, they don't have to pick and choose who they're dealing with and screen everybody individually because that's just too much work for them. And what it really means underneath all of that is that they don't have any personal screening skills. Like they don't trust their own judgment. Honestly, that's how I feel. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Somebody can tell me if they want to. They can send me a message and tell me if that's how they feel, if it's otherwise. I believe that they don't have enough trust in themselves to go off or talk to somebody in a bar and not be taken for a fool in some way or other. Now, this might have something to do with somebody they've already met. This might be in relation to a past relationship they've had or somebody that they've run into before. And sometimes it only takes you to, some people run into one person from one environment, and as far as they're concerned, the entire environment's poisoned and they can't go near any of it again because of that one person. Not letting themselves understand that, hey, you went into a bar, you met a guy in a bar, or you met a girl in a bar. Of course, you didn't know any better. This person was somebody you didn't know, you hadn't experienced yet. You can't possibly blame yourself for not seeing something coming that you didn't know how to look for. But once you do meet somebody in a bar and they turn out to be a jerk, labeling everybody from bars and clubs as jerks from that point on, it's just your way of protecting yourself to the extent where you go so overboard that you won't talk to anybody in a bar or club. I happen to know that, like I said, there are so many different types of people in bars and clubs that you can't possibly broad brush that area. You have people working there. You have people that go to a bar twice a year for some stupid thing. They all go out for a bachelor party, or they all go out for a divorce party or a birthday party or whatever. There's people that are in that bar for that reason that are never in a bar and just happen to be there one night. There are people who are, we call them bar stars. There are people there who are there every week. However, there are people that go to bars and don't go to look for people. They're just there because they like the music. They're there because they like the atmosphere. They know the bartender. There's something about the bar that's familiar to them, and it's sort of like a little family away from home. It's not something where that's what they're there to do. So you can't really point at every single person that walks into a bar and say, oh, these people are all horrible, they're all terrible, none of them are any good. That doesn't make sense to me. Again, the only reason I would say something like that is because I was hurt by somebody in a bar one time, and I've decided to take my entire life and focus on bars and say, well, I can't go near any bars anymore ever again because that one person hurt me, and I'm too much of a novice to like be able to tell the difference. I got hurt, so I'm just gonna. It's easier for me to stay safe by like just, throwing a big red X on any kind of nightlife environment because I can't navigate that. So I'm making them wrong because of course I won't look at myself. Most people won't look at themselves and say, "Hey, I suck at this." It's more like, "Oh no, that's a bad place. I'm fine, but that place is no good because I went into one of those places like 20 years ago for 2 hours and went into somebody that did me wrong." Anyway, to me, that's what absolutions are. They also say stuff to you like, well, you say to somebody, hey, I don't have any children, and they say to you, well, you'll meet the right guy. Everybody wants children. It's kind of like, nope, that's an absolute statement. That's not something that's accurate. That is a way maybe of validating yourself because maybe you had children and you weren't sure if you should have, and maybe it's weird to you or it makes you feel bad to know that some people don't, and maybe it makes you question yourself. I don't know, but for you to take what you've done and say, hey, everybody wants what I want, everybody wants what I've done, is a way to validate yourself so that you don't second guess whether or not you made the right choice. That's what that is. So when you get that from somebody else, know that they're trying to question themselves, or they're trying not to question themselves. They're trying to use something that I'm going to talk about next, which is a thought-terminating cliche to stop themselves from really investigating on whether or not they should have made the decision that they made. And they can't change now because it's too late. So why bother thinking about it? So therefore, thought-terminating cliche, that's something like, oh, what can you do? Or it's all good. Or, hey, what will be. Or, hey, stop thinking so hard about this. Or the most popular one I think now is fake news. That's something that people it's become like a comedic phrase at this point where people are using it all the time. And that's just, it's basically what a thought-terminating cliche is. It's something that is built or made to stop you from doing any kind of thinking about something that you may or may not like. No investigating into it. It keeps you from looking deeper into something that you might decide you don't want to do, or that might have bad consequences, or that might not be good for you. And we see that a lot in certain religions and cults and things like that, where somebody teaches you, when you feel like this, just say this to yourself and move on. That's a thought-terminating cliche. It's something that stops you from actually doing any kind of deep thinking about something and whether or not it's right for you or whether or not it's right for anyone. And so that's what that is. Also, we have passive aggression, and that's people who, the bottom line of passive aggression is people that don't want to confront you directly about something. They use sarcasm, they use dismissive behavior, they use things like procrastination, telling you they'll do something and then just not doing it, or giving you a sarcastic answer when you ask something. All passive aggressive. It's basically somebody who doesn't want to just come out and say something that bothers them. They'd rather torture you indirectly instead. Passive aggression. They throw digs at you, or they are sarcastic with you, or they use excuses to do something that, or to avoid something that they don't want to do. And again, instead of saying, hey, I don't want to do that, instead of being direct about it, I've dealt with a lot of that in my life where somebody has assumed I knew what they meant, even though they said something completely different, because I don't know. They grew up thinking that it was rude to tell me something directly. So instead they tell me something that is, I'm supposed to pick up the long way around, that like basically they don't want to do a thing or they don't like a thing or something like that. But they didn't tell me that. They just said something completely different and then like hoped I picked up on the hint. And sometimes there's a little bit of angst in there as well. And, of course I'm oblivious. So it goes over my head and I assume what they tell me is, I take them at their word, and then of course I get in trouble for taking them at their word, even though that's what they said to me. Passive aggression is always fun. It is a minefield, right? And then somebody who's trying to emotionally trigger you, and that means like they're trying to make you cry, or they're trying to almost use emotional reasoning, like how do you think this makes me feel, and just things that are supposed to trigger your emotional reaction. If you're not having one, they're telling you that you're crazy because you should be having one. If you are having one, they're telling you because you're crazy because you're too emotional. Anything that centers around emotional triggering or emotional appeal, in my opinion, is manipulative. Somebody who's like, there's not enough emotion here, there should be more, or they throw emotion at you and you don't respond to it the right way, and they tell you, well, something's wrong with you because this should have made you cry, this should have made you mad, this should have made you happy, whatever it is. There should be an emotion coming out of you. My favorite thing, although it's manipulation, and I think it's more of a social construct of manipulation, is when somebody's grieving a death and they're told that they're not grieving it correctly. I mean, every time I hear somebody say that, it's kind of like, people are who they are. There's no one way that people grieve anything. Maybe you've been watching way too much like network television or way too many dramas, but like, people don't all have the same reaction to death. Some people are very stoic about it. Some people they stop eating or they get depressed. They don't get out of bed. There's a lot of things people do to grieve the loss of like a loved one, whether it be somebody that in their family, a human, a dog, a cat, whatever. The grieving process is so different for everybody that you cannot ever point to somebody and say, well, you're grieving wrong. I can't believe I've heard it, but I can't believe that I ever heard that coming from people, but I have. I've seen it a few times where in the end, like, I watch a lot of cold case files and true crime and things like that. And there are people who will base a case or base a story on whether or not a person is not remorseful, because that's another thing, but that somebody's not grieving enough or crying enough. There's a specific amount of emotional outbursts that they expect from people. And I always think, God, how does somebody measure that? Like, how can somebody point to another person and say they're not the right amount of emotional about this thing? Like, it's crazy to me because of the fact that we all have such a spectrum of emotions. And I say that because I do cry over people, but I don't do it in the way that most people expect. I don't visibly bawl and cry that much while things are happening, while funerals are happening, while wakes are happening. I'm one to cry silently, especially when it comes to my family and people that I've lost that are important to me. I cry. I may not cry right in front of you. I may cry when I get back to my car. I'm like, it's not that I've never cried over people. I just don't cry where and when people would expect me to. That doesn't mean I'm not upset. That doesn't mean it doesn't bother me. So that's just one example, but also people will emotionally trigger you to keep you off balance. And again, like I said before, there are people who know keeping somebody off balance emotionally is a good way to leverage what they want from that person. And that's going to be adjacent to inconsistency. And the thing I brought up before of like, is somebody hot, cold with you? I mean, that is emotional triggering actually causes a trauma bond with another person. A person will actually bond because of that. Like, if there are good times and bad times and, it's not always consistent. At some point, a victim will be looking for good times enough to like tolerate bad times. It all depends on the environment they're in, obviously, but that's kind of a way to create a bond. It may not be a healthy bond, but it is what it is. I'm using a thought-terminating cliche by saying that, but in my case, the way that I say it, I don't really mean it the same way. But yeah, it is meant to keep you off balance. And I always say, like, there are sometimes it doesn't matter what the intent is. Sometimes it doesn't matter whether somebody's trying to do that to you or not. If it's happening to you, get away from them. Just get away from them if it's happening to you. It's not worth it to put up with that kind of inconsistency and emotional triggering when somebody loves you today and hates you tomorrow and doesn't talk to you the next day, and it goes on and on and on, back and forth. It's not worth it to put yourself through that for anybody. So I don't think intent sometimes I don't think intent matters in some cases. It just doesn't matter if they're trying to do it on purpose or they're not. If that's the result of it, that's the result of it. In a previous podcast, at least one, Dave has said, we were talking about jealousy in one of our podcasts, and he said something like, if I'm the type of person that when I'm with that person, I feel jealous, that means that they just trigger something in me that needs to not be happening. And it doesn't matter if they're trying to do it or not. It matters that, like, this is how I feel around this person. That means I need to get away from them. I just need to end it, because it doesn't really matter. I could sit and talk all day about whether or not they're trying to do it and whether or not I should feel that way. At the end of the day, this is the result I get. And so therefore I have to work on that result. I have to base my decision on that result. I feel like I want to go through their stuff. I feel like I want to yell at them for fooling around on me or whatever. I have a really weird reaction to them. It almost doesn't matter why they're doing it or if they even know they're doing anything. All that matters is this is how I feel every time I'm around this person. End of story. So, like I said, it doesn't always matter why it's happening. It just matters that you feel that way, the way you feel, or your reaction is what it is. And if it never changes, then you know that's unhealthy. So, and we get down to stonewalling. Stonewalling is a little bit of a sore subject for me because I happen to be a dismissive avoidant, which means I take a lot of space and breaks from people. And it's not stonewalling, but I've had people accuse me of that because in a way they wanted to manipulate me to get what they wanted. And so calling me taking time and just needing some solitude, stonewalling them so that I'm not responding to them, they've twisted that on me. So I'm a little sensitive to it. But if it's done in an unhealthy way, where somebody's specifically trying to make you feel bad or trying to cause emotional turmoil, stonewalling is where you just refuse to respond to somebody for days, no matter what they do. And it's generally used as a form of punishment. And so if you're having an argument with somebody and you want them to say this and they want you to say that, you both disagree on something, it's basically dropping off the face of the earth and not calling them back or talking to them for 3 days and not telling them where you went. That's basically what stonewalling is. Or if you're in the same environment, if you're in the same house, it's not speaking to them in the same house. It's just ignoring them and not speaking to them, not looking at them for however many hours or days you want to do it, to keep the other person in a state where they're more vulnerable to you. It's a form of punishment to you, and maybe it isn't something you care about. You're not really interested in how they feel about it, but that's what it usually means when you stonewall. And it's also, I guess it's like some people will use the word radio silence or the phrase radio silence, and I guess that's also a label for it. And then finally, there's devil's advocate. Now, devil's advocate's kind of tricky. It can be a good thing in conversation. And my particular Myers-Briggs type, we tend to see things from all angles. That doesn't mean we agree with any of them. But when we're in a conversation or we're in a debate with people about a specific topic, we're able to put we somehow or other are able to put ourselves in the position of the opposition, the person on the other side. Again, not every single time, but it's something that we're usually pretty good at doing. And the reason we'll do it is just to argue the other side, even if you and I have the exact same beliefs and believe and agree on the exact same thing. I'm able to say, well, if I was this other person that disagreed with everything that we both agree with, I could put myself in those shoes and I could ask questions and discuss from that point of view to try to get some kind of understanding of what it is that they're feeling, what their motives are, their strategies, things like that. Now, it's possible to do and have it be fairly benign and fairly innocent. However, there are people who do use devil's advocate as a way to be combative or antagonistic, or to specifically take the opposite stance to, I don't know, annoy you or run you in circles. And so there are forms of people that do a devil's advocate strategy to almost unnerve or rattle the other person. It's not really, or they just, some people just love the thrill of the argument. They love to just get in there and debate. They don't care what it is. They don't care what the opposition is. They're just going to take the side you're not on every single time and then try to break it down into critical thinking and break it down into subcategories and details and whatever it is, as if they were somebody that you are arguing with. It won't matter what the side is that they're on. It will matter that they take the opposite side just for the sake of arguing. And some people do that until you're exhausted. So, of course, there's a whole lot more, but those are the ones that at least I wrote down. I'm sure there's actually, I will say this to you, message me if there are forms of manipulation that I did not address, because there's so many that I didn't want to, if I went over a whole list of them, I would probably be here for 2 days. But if there's an important part of manipulation that I have not addressed and you would prefer I talk about it, then, feel free to message me whenever you want and tell me whether or not you agree with what I'm telling you. And if there's something that I missed I have no problem with that. And you can catch us at Lana and Dave. That's on Facebook, that's on Instagram, and that's on Twitter. And on Facebook, we have our group there called Love and Life with Lana and Dave. You should be able to find that, right? So those are all of the ones that I listed to discuss. And again, I'm going to bring up inconsistency and say, if you have somebody dealing with you that's so inconsistent that you want to pull your hair out of your head, there's no point to that. It may be who they are. It may be what they're trying to do to you, but I don't really care why they're doing it. What matters is that they're continuing to do it. And it's frustrating, and it's a hassle, and it doesn't make sense to continue unless I should bring up Gray Rock, right? Well, that's going to be part of one of my my next category, my third category, and my third part to this podcast, which is what to do about things like this. So I'll add that there. But at the end of the day, obviously, if you have no way to get away from somebody and you have to deal with them, there are ways to do that. But if you don't have to, I just don't see why you would want to. It doesn't make any sense to continue. So, so for part 3 of our manipulation podcast, what are the things that you can do to deal with this? And I'll tell you what I did. I just made it so that, first of all, you can't come from the same home as I did. Obviously, not everybody can. I came from a home where there was a huge amount of manipulation and abuse going on. And so I'm just good at spotting it. I'm just extremely good at spotting it. I know what worked in the household for me to get away from being targeted. And so it was a little harder, actually, as a kid. One, I had to learn what was happening and then learn how to avoid it and all that kind of stuff. And in my household, I couldn't really extricate myself from what was happening. I had to be there. I had to go through my childhood and live in that house. So I learned how to just make it so that I wasn't on the radar a lot of times where it came to stuff like that. However, outside of my childhood, it's actually easier for me to deal with somebody that is manipulative, that's coming in my direction, that I'm not obligated to deal with in any way, shape, or form. And it's so much easier for me to avoid than it is for me to deal. I could deal with it, but it's so much easier to avoid it and just sidestep it when you see it coming. And I happen to just be really good at seeing it coming. But I always ask myself why. And I did a whole podcast on the word why, and so I'll ask you to refer back to that one. But ask yourself why. Why instead of responding to what they're saying, and I know it's hard, you have to learn to do it and it takes a while, but once you get the hang of it, it's liberating and amazing. Why are they doing this? Why are they saying this to me? Come up with a little strategy about what it is that instead of just responding to the stimulus that they throw out, try to figure out. They want the focus on you when they manipulate. People that manipulate you want you to be the focus of whatever's happening, the blame or whatever it is that they're doing. But when you focus on them and not in a good way, that generally is not something they want. And so you focus on them while they're talking to you, and it sounds like that Charlie Brown's teacher, wah, 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 wah. You don't really hear the words, but you say, now, why would this person think that this makes sense to do? What would make this person want to do this thing to me? And also understand that you're not unique in this, and that you are a target, but you're not a special target. That this person's generally going to do stuff like this to everybody. And you might happen to be the person of the week, or you may happen to be the person that's standing in the room at that point. But don't think that it's personal to you in the sense that you have it coming, you deserve it, anything like that. This type of person, if they're manipulative, is this way with several people, and you just happen to be the one they're dealing with at the moment. So you say to yourself, okay, well, what would this person want from me that they think that if they do this, they're going to get their way? Try to figure out behind what they're saying, what their intent is. And then I use 3 specific tactics. Well, I use one overall tactic with manipulators. Most people may want something from me, but I always make it very clear that I don't want anything from them, and I'm fine with or without them. I really do make a point, and again, it may or may not be healthy, and if I ever get into therapy, I'm sure I'll deal with it, but I'm pretty bent on making sure everybody around me knows that I can take or leave them. And if they don't think I need them for anything, if they don't think that I have to have them, or there's something about them that I can't live without, they can't leverage manipulation on me, because it doesn't there's nothing that they can do that is going to make me bend to their will. Because I'm an independent person. I take care of myself. I don't need anybody for anything. Now, obviously, we can get into a whole thing about need. But what I'm saying is, for the most part, I take care of all my own needs. I happen to be a person who takes care of myself. I work, I pay my bills, whatever. So it's not a whole lot of things I depend on people for. And I've learned as a child, and maybe, again, it may be an unhealthy lesson that I learned, but I learned leaning on people because you need them is not a good idea, at least not with people that I grew up with, or not the people that I lived with growing up. So it's much more, to be self-sufficient is just a much better position for me to be in. That gives me much more leverage to my people around me and much more grounding. So I first off try to start by not being dependent on anyone so that they can never use this against me. That's basically what it is. So that's something that you start with that if you can. But the three things I use, one is silence. I mean, if you're silent in response to something somebody says to you, not forever, but just give yourself a minute to stop and think about why they're saying what they're saying. You're going to go silent for about 3 or 4 minutes, or maybe even 2 minutes, 30 seconds, a minute, and you're not going to immediately respond. Try to program yourself not to emotionally or viscerally react to stuff they say. Most people that are manipulators are counting on that response from you. They're counting on that reaction. That's something they want to see. That's something that they say what they say to get. And to not give it to them and to learn how not to give it to them is an amazing thing. A lot of people sometimes will crack under the pressure of just you sitting there and not responding to things. They'll actually get mad that they're not getting the response that they want. They'll get mad that you're not reacting to something they're saying because they planned it all out and it didn't fall the way they wanted it to. And sometimes that's all it takes for somebody to come unglued. And that's not why I do it, but it is a lovely side effect to somebody who throws something out in a manipulative fashion, expecting me to flip off the handle over that. And then usually with passive aggressive people, I've decided that I'm going to take everything everybody says literally, and I'm going to respond to them like that. Never usually get angry or anything like that, but I will respond with, "Oh, that's interesting," and I'll answer them as though they've said something completely literal to me. Or if I'm not sure what they mean, or both of the time you do know what people mean, but if you don't want to give into that, you can ask them what they mean by what they're saying. If you do it enough times, that'll usually rattle somebody as well. The key is to manipulate the manipulator, and I don't mean that as a game. I just mean, if they can do it, so can you. And if they try to manipulate you and they end up the ones that get rattled over it, well, they're asking for it. You know what I mean? And then the third thing I use is a psychoanalysis. And that's where I kind of put my finger and thumb up to my chin, do one of those, and I'll ask, "Gee, how so?" Or, "That's interesting," I'll say. "What makes you think blah, blah, blah?" I'll respond to them in a way that like I'm having a normal conversation with them and I'm very curious about where they're going with what they're saying. In no way, shape, or form do I react emotionally. So if somebody says, "Well, you're a such and such and such," instead of getting mad, my response is, "That's interesting. In what way?" Or, "How so?" Or, "What did I do to make you think that was," or what happened to make you take this conclusion from how did you get to this conclusion, or what happened that caused you to think that way? I'm interested in finding out. That's never something that they're ready to deal with. And they might go down the road with you once or twice, but eventually they're going to get frustrated with you because you're supposed to just fly into a rage and get upset. And you're supposed to be irrational. And that's what they're trying to get out of you. Again, a lot of manipulators will try to put you on an uneasy platform because they want you to be irrational. They want you to be angry or upset, or they want you to kind of come unglued, because when you do, it gives them the leverage to do what they want to do. So learn how to sort of pause and look at them and maybe look up at the ceiling for a minute and then look back and be like, "That's an interesting statement. Why would you say that to me?" Or, "What makes you think that that's true?" Or whatever. Just like you picture Sherlock Holmes in your head with the pipe and kind of come back with the Sherlock Holmes response. Like, "That's interesting." You think that, "I'm a piece of shit. That's interesting." And then you can even, if they call you something that's strong enough, or they get upset about something and they insult you strong enough, you can completely within your rights to tell them that they're having an overly emotional response to something, and dying to know what would cause them to be that emotional about it. So if somebody says, hey, you're a piece of shit, you can come back and go, look, that's an awfully strong thing to say to me. I mean, that seems like an emotional insult. Like, wow, what did I do that caused this much turmoil to you that you think that you had to insult me in this way? They don't want to hear that. They do not want to find out, or they don't want you to tell them that they're being emotional. That's the thing you're supposed to, right? And then the next thing, the last thing I wanted to bring up, which I kind of brought up a little bit earlier, is gray rock. And gray rock is something where you are not wanting to deal with toxic. I know that's a buzzword, but in a way, some people really are toxic. They cause emotional turmoil, and when they know they do that, they repeatedly do it, and it is kind of unhealthy for you to be around. So if you're in a situation basically where you cannot remove yourself from that person, they are a boss, they are a coworker, they are a parent, they are a child, they are a sibling, they are a spouse, they are somebody that's permanently in your life, and you really can't extricate yourself from the situation. Like myself, when I was a child, I learned to gray rock because it was easier for me to gray rock than to, obviously, when I was too young to escape a situation, there would have been no way I was able to do that. So basically what I learned was just to kind of like become extremely boring as a target, not respond to anything, not respond in the way that a person would hope I would respond to emotional triggers, to humiliation, to emotional abuse, to physical abuse, things like that. You just kind of go numb and not respond to these things. I learned, again, like I said earlier, I learned how not to become an interesting target to that person. That person just ended up turning, their attention to somebody who was much more fun to push buttons for. And for me, I learned when you push my buttons, at least when I was living at home as a kid, I learned just not to respond to that. You know what I mean? And eventually I just became, it's never permanent when you're dealing with family and people that you're married to or work with, or, it's obviously a long-standing relationship. So there are going to be times where you're going to repeatedly become a target for that person, maybe just because of proximity. But for the most part, you just learn how not to be something in their path that like they find interesting to play with. That's basically what it is. If you've ever seen a cat pull, all the legs off of it, insects, that kind of thing, where they don't really want you to die, they just want you to be suffering for a while. That kind of thing is what you don't want to deal with it as a kid, and there's really no recourse at that age or at specific points in your life or with specific people where you can just cut contact with them altogether. It's not possible or feasible, or eventually maybe you could, but for a while you're going to have to put up with it. That's gray rock. And if you look that up, you'll see the definition of that. And that's basically to just become very boring, very mundane, and very unresponsive to the stuff that they're trying to trigger you to do. So yeah, that's gray rock. These are kind of my ways of handling it. Of course, the first thing to do is obviously kind of get good at understanding things like this. And once you get to be a little bit of an expert, you just sidestep it because it's not even worth getting into, a discourse with somebody like this anyway. Like, it's just not. And if you can step aside, you're really better off a lot of times for people to set their sights on you when they're manipulators. It's not fun. It's a hassle. It's something that it stops down your daily routine. It breaks up your flow as a human being. It's not worth it. But if you're in a position already where you have to respond to it, I would say those are the three best ways to deal with it. One would be silence. And a lot of people are uncomfortable with silence. So if you count to 5 before you respond, I mean, that puts them a little bit off point. That gives them a little bit of an uneasiness. And you kind of throw them off by doing that, which is what you want to do. And then answering with a question or a clarifying question or a curiosity to, what you're saying is very interesting. Why do you think that this is what it is? Or why are you calling me this name? Or why do you feel like I'm irresponsible, or whatever it is? Break it down for me so I can understand. Let's get into detail about this. They don't want that. They want you to just be mad. So if you start asking for details and facts and data about what they're telling you, they're probably not going to have it. You may hear something like, you know what I mean, or you should know what I mean. Or if somebody flies off the handle and tells you, well, I'm not going to try to explain it to you, you should know what I'm talking about, you're well within your rights to say, no, I don't. But you want to tell me exactly what it is you're addressing, because I really have no idea what you're talking about. And you shouldn't have to know what they're talking about. That's on them. That's on them to bring it up. If they want to talk to you about it and have it be productive, then they should explain what it is they're talking about. And to throw out something vague and then tell you should know, is another tactic. And so you don't have to fall for that either. Obviously, a disclaimer I will use is if somebody's going to be abusive, or if somebody's going to be physically abusive to you, or any kind of thing where you're put yourself in danger, obviously silence and getting away from that person is the best thing to do. But if you're in a position where you're not going to be hurt by the person, because there are some people who do get upset and, it will put you at risk. You obviously don't want to put yourself at risk. But if you're in a situation where this is not a risk that you're going to have to worry about, you really don't have to go down the road of, you could just kind of respond to them. It is, as a matter of fact, the thing that you shouldn't say, or the thing that they're trying to get you to go around and just be upset. I mean, that's where you need to go. Look, you're telling me this about me, but I have no idea what you're talking about. Do you want to give me more information? When was this or what was the thing that I did that gives you this conclusion? So anyway, those are all of my 3 parts for manipulation. And of course, now we are in part 2, because I like to talk, but I stayed on my notes for the most part, pretty much. And the 3 topics that we went through, well, the one topic is manipulation, how to fight manipulation with logic, but our 3 parts were like what causes manipulation and what types of manipulation we deal with and will deal with and people bring to us. And then the 3rd part being what to do about it, how to handle it. But hopefully this has been at least interesting, if not educational, for you. And like I said, the 2 big things to me are inconsistency and your comfort. If those 2 things are compromised in any way, then there's really no reason to continue to interact with a human being that doesn't care about that sort of thing. But I'm going to give you our podcast website, which is www.laneanddave.com. And we have buymeacoffee.com/Lane and Dave, and that's where you go. You buy us coffees because we are coffee fanatics and we love it. So buying us coffees keeps us awake during our podcast. And don't fret. Dave is not going anywhere. Again, both of us are doing some summer stuff. I'm going a little crazy with some stuff, but I had a couple of weeks of chaos and I'm now getting some quiet time. So I'm able to get a little bit of this in so that over the summer you guys will have something to listen to. So I'm trying to throw some podcasts in while I have some downtime myself. And we will be back on track shortly enough. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your summer, because we're starting to roll into September at this point, and that's so crazy. I can't believe this year's 3/4 over or 4/4 over. Maybe it's 2/3 of the way over. Let's call it that. But I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Please download and subscribe. Give us 5-star review. That'd be great. If you have any questions, email us, message us. I would say message us. That's the best way to get a hold of us, no matter what platform you want to do it on. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Those are all at Lana and Dave. Catch us there. Send us a quick message if you have anything you want to say, and we will take it into account. We will see you next week. Bye-bye. Hey, you just listened to Love and Life with Lana and Dave. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please share the podcast, leave us a comment or review, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any new content. We'll see you soon.